The pirate flagship was the last to retreat, its commander broadcasting a final message of impotent fury before engaging, faster than light drives and vanishing into the darkness between stars. Kang Ji-hoon had allowed that ship to escape deliberately, a decision that puzzled Counselor Park Se-jin until the human explained his reasoning. Dead pirates cannot spread warnings, Ji-hoon said, but a defeated commander who limps home to tell his colleagues what happened here will make others think twice before targeting medical stations. He sat on a medical bed in the primary treatment ward while Dr. Yeon Suho worked to repair the damage that his improvised defense had done to his already injured body. The human's hands were raw and bleeding from manual overrides and emergency repairs, and the cardiac monitor showed irregularities that suggested his heart had stopped at least twice more during the battle. Both times, it had restarted on its own. I do not understand you, Suho admitted as he applied regenerative compounds to the worst of Ji-hoon's wounds. You were dying when we found you, and instead of resting and healing, you chose to risk your life for strangers who would have happily let the Concordat take you away. They are not strangers anymore, Ji-hoon replied with a tired smile. And the Concordat's plans for me were not personal, just policy. And policy can be changed. He winced as Suho treated a particularly deep laceration on his forearm. Besides, there were children, and I could not let children be hurt when I had the power to prevent it, even at the cost of your own life. Especially at that cost, Ji-hoon said. That is what it means to be human, Doctor. We protect the vulnerable because protecting them is more important than protecting ourselves. Suho considered this statement and found that it aligned with what he had observed during the battle. The way Ji-hoon had positioned himself between threats and civilians without hesitation. The way he had prioritized the safety of others over any tactical advantage. The historical records say your species was quarantined because you were too dangerous for galactic civilization, Suho said. But what I witnessed today suggests the opposite. Humans are dangerous, Ji-hoon agreed. But not in the way the Concordat believed. We are not dangerous because we want to conquer or destroy. We are dangerous because when we decide something matters to us, we become unstoppable in our efforts to protect it. He looked at Suho with those brown eyes that had seen so much in the past 2 days. The Concordat quarantined us because they could not predict or control that drive. They could not understand why a species would sacrifice itself for strangers, and what they could not understand, they feared. Administrator Big Gina entered the treatment ward with Counselor Park, following reluctantly behind her. The battle had changed something in the power dynamics of the station, and even Park seemed to recognize that his authority had been diminished by his willingness to abandon the civilian population. The Concordat reinforcement fleet has arrived, Gina reported, and they have brought a diplomatic delegation that wishes to speak with you, Ji-hoon. About what? About the future, Park answered, his voice carrying none of the cold authority it had held before the battle. The events of today will not remain secret. Too many people witnessed what happened. And the Concordat Council has decided that a reassessment of human quarantine status may be necessary. Ji-hoon nodded slowly, showing no surprise at this development. My people have been waiting 3,000 years for that reassessment. He said, we knew it would come eventually, but we had hoped it would come through diplomacy rather than through circumstances like these. Why did you not simply break the quarantine by force? Suho asked, if humans are as capable as you have demonstrated. Surely your species could have challenged the Concordat fleet. We could have, Ji-hoon agreed. And we would have won eventually. But victory through force would have proven everything the Concordat believed about us. And we did not want to prove them right. We wanted to prove them wrong. He swung his legs off the medical bed and stood despite Suho's protests, facing the administrator and the counselor with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout his ordeal. Humans are not conquerors, he said. We are builders and healers and protectors. And we have spent 3,000 years building a civilization that would be worthy of joining the galactic community. Not as a threat to be contained, but as a partner to be welcomed. And if the Concordat refuses that partnership, Park asked, then we will continue waiting, Ji-hoon replied. Because the right thing done the wrong way is still wrong. And we would rather be isolated forever than achieve integration through violence. Park stared at the human for a long moment. And Suho watched something shift in the counselor's expression. I misjudged you, Park admitted. I came here expecting to find a threat that needed to be contained. And instead I found something I do not have a framework to understand. Understanding takes time, Ji-hoon said, but it starts with conversation. And I am happy to have that conversation whenever you are ready. Dr. Cha Dong-yoon arrived with a data tablet and his manipulator appendages. His 8 eyes bright with academic excitement that seemed inappropriate given the recent crisis. I have been reviewing the biological data we collected during your treatment, he said to Ji-hoon. And I believe I finally understand the contradictions in your species profile. Oh? You are simultaneously predator and prey because you evolved from prey that chose to become predators, Dong-yoon explained. Your immune system is aggressive because your homeworld was filled with biological threats. Your bones heal stronger because your environment broke them frequently. And your psychology shifts between social and solitary because your survival required both strategies depending on circumstances. He paused as if building to a revelation, but the most remarkable adaptation is your emotional capacity, your ability to form bonds of loyalty and protection that override self-preservation instincts. That is not a weakness as the historical record suggested. It is your greatest strength. Ji-hoon smiled at the xenobiologist. We call it love, he said simply. And it comes in many forms. Love for family, love for friends, love for community, love for strangers who need help, and love for a universe that is vast and beautiful and full of beings worth knowing. Nurse Kwon Mi-rae had entered the treatment ward during Dong-yoon's explanation, and Suho noticed that she no longer kept her distance from the human. I felt that love during the battle, she said quietly. It burned so brightly that I thought it would overwhelm me. But now I understand that it was not overwhelming. It was illuminating. She approached Ji-hoon and extended her hand in a gesture that Suho recognized as a human greeting. Thank you for protecting us, she said. And thank you for showing me what your people can be. Ji-hoon took her hand gently, clearly aware of how fragile the contact must feel to his Lathani observer. Thank you for seeing us clearly, he replied. That is all we have ever wanted. Later that evening, after the diplomatic delegation had departed with promises of continued dialogue and Counselor Park had retreated to his quarters to contemplate his changed understanding, Dr. Yeon Suho sat in his office composing a report that would change galactic history. He had been a physician for 40 years, dedicated to the principle that all sapient life deserved care and compassion regardless of species origin or political circumstance. Today, he had witnessed that principle embodied in a single member of a species that the galaxy had tried to forget. His compound eyes reviewed the patient file one final time before submitting his report to the Galactic Medical Database. Patient name, Kang Ji-hoon species, human classification. Pending reclassification to protected ally status in the notes section. Suho added his own observations. Initial assessment indicated species unclassified and potentially threatening. Comprehensive evaluation reveals species of exceptional capability and equally exceptional compassion. Recommend immediate revision of all historical protocols regarding human contact and integration. The galaxy has nothing to fear from humanity except the shame of having rejected them for so long. He transmitted the report and leaned back in his chair. his mandibles clicking with a satisfaction he had not felt in decades outside his office window. The stars burned with the same light they had always burned, indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who sailed between them, but somewhere among those stars, a species that had been forgotten was preparing to return, not as conquerors or threats, but as what they had always been: healers and builders and protectors, ready to take their place among the stars. And Dr. Yeon Suho, who had expected nothing more than a routine file, found himself grateful beyond words that he had been the one to welcome them back in his personal log. He wrote one final entry for the day. I expected a routine file and instead found a species that dies and refuses to stay dead, that fears nothing except the failure to protect others, that loves with an intensity that defies rational analysis. I found a human, and I believe the galaxy is about to change for the better. He saved the entry and looked out at the stars one more time. Somewhere out there, Kang Ji-hoon was teaching Nurse Kwan a game called Rock, Paper, Scissors, his laughter carrying through the corridors of a station that had almost been destroyed. And somewhere beyond the quarantine zone, billions of humans were. Unclassified, the emergency command center of Station Vera 7 had been designed for coordination of medical responses to mass casualty events, not for military defense against pirate fleets. Kang Ji-hoon studied the facility's layout on a holographic display while Counselor Park Seo-jun argued with Administrator Beek Gina about evacuation protocols, and Dr. Yeon Suho watched the human with a mixture of professional concern and growing fascination. The station has minimal defensive capabilities, Gina was saying. We have point defense systems for debris avoidance and electromagnetic countermeasures for navigation hazards, but nothing designed for actual combat. Then we evacuate essential personnel on the Concordat vessels. Park replied, the pirates will take what they want from the station and depart once they realize there is nothing of significant value here. Essential personnel, Suho repeated, his mandibles clicking with displeasure. And the patients in our care? The staff who tend to them, are they considered non-essential? Park's silence was answer enough. There are children on this station, Ji-hoon said quietly, still studying the holographic display. The words cut through the argument like a surgical laser. Medical families are permitted residential quarters on Vera 7. Gina confirmed. We have approximately 40 children currently in residence, along with their parents and guardians. Something changed in Ji-hoon's posture. A subtle shift in the way he held himself that transformed the injured patient into something far more dangerous. Suho had seen similar transformations in predatory species when their hunting instincts engaged. But this was different. This was not a predator preparing to hunt. This was something else entirely. Counselor Park, Ji-hoon said, his voice carrying a calm that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. Your evacuation vessels have how many passenger slots? Enough for my staff and the station's senior administration. Not enough for 40 children and their families, regrettably. No. Ji-hoon turned to face the counselor directly, and Suho watched Park take an involuntary step backward, even though the human made no threatening gesture. Then we do not evacuate, Ji-hoon said. We defend. With what? Park demanded. You heard the administrator. This station has no meaningful defensive capabilities. This station has me. The words hung in the air with a weight that seemed to defy their simplicity, and Suho found himself believing them despite every logical argument. Against such confidence, I need access to the station's engineering systems. Ji-hoon continued, turning to Gina, and I need someone who knows the layout of every maintenance corridor, storage area, and utility junction. To what end? Gina asked. The pirates are coming here because they tracked my escape pod, which means they are coming for me specifically, probably to ensure there are no witnesses to their attack on my ship. And that gives us an advantage. How is being specifically targeted an advantage? Park asked with incredulity. Because it means they have a goal beyond simple raiding. Ji-hoon replied, they want something specific. And that specificity creates predictable behavior. And predictable enemies are enemies you can defeat. He turned to the engineering console and began pulling up schematics with a speed that suggested familiarity with similar systems. I need Nurse Kwan, he said to Suho. Her empathic abilities will help me. Coordinate civilian responders by monitoring emotional states and identifying panic before it spreads. She is not trained for combat situations. Neither is anyone else on this station, which is why we are not going to fight a combat situation. We are going to fight a human situation. Suho did not understand what that meant, but he found himself moving to summon Mireille regardless. The next 30 minutes unfolded with a pace that left Suho struggling to process the rapid changes taking place throughout the station. Ji-hoon moved through the facility like a force of nature, issuing instructions that transformed a medical station into something approaching a defensive position. Medical waste processing systems were reconfigured to create chemical hazards in specific corridors. Their automated protocols were programmed to release caustic cleaning compounds on command. Diagnostic scanning equipment was repositioned to create makeshift sensor networks that would track movement through sections of the station that the standard internal sensors could not monitor. Most remarkably, Ji-hoon organized the civilian staff into coordinated response teams, assigning roles based on their existing skills rather than forcing them into unfamiliar military positions. Kitchen workers became supply coordinators, moving essential materials to fallback positions throughout the station. Maintenance technicians became sabotage specialists, rigging doors and airlocks with traps that would delay and confuse any boarding parties. Even the children were given tasks, the older ones assigned as runners to carry messages between teams, and the younger ones gathered in the most defensible section of the station with guardians who volunteered to protect them at any cost. Nurse Kwan Mireille worked alongside Ji-hoon throughout the preparations, her empathic abilities allowing her to identify stress points in the civilian response teams before they could develop into full panic. But Suho noticed that she kept her distance from the human when possible, and when he asked her why, her answer disturbed him deeply. His emotional state is terrifying, she whispered. Not because he is afraid, doctor, but because he is not afraid at all. He is completely focused on one single purpose, and that purpose burns in him like a star. What purpose? Mireille's luminescent skin flickered with patterns Suho had never seen from her before. Protection, she said. He has decided that everyone on this station is under his protection, and that decision has consumed every other consideration in his mind. And I do not think there is anything in the universe that can change that now. The pirate fleet arrived exactly 37 minutes after the initial sensor detection. 12 vessels ranging from small assault craft to a converted cargo hauler that appeared to serve as the flotilla's flagship. They broadcast a simple demand: surrender the human or the station would be destroyed. Counselor Park moved to respond, but Ji-hoon reached the communications console first. This is Kang Ji-hoon, he said into the broadcast pickup, his voice carrying across all frequencies. I am the one you are looking for, and I am going to give you one chance to leave. Laughter came back across the channel, harsh and mocking. 1 human against 12 ships? The pirate commander replied, I think not, little Terran. Surrender yourself, and perhaps we will let the station survive. Ji-hoon's response was not words. He entered a command sequence into the engineering console, and the station's debris defense systems came online with targeting parameters that should have been impossible given their original specifications. Point defense lasers designed to vaporize small rocks became precision weapons capable of targeting specific components on approaching vessels. Electromagnetic countermeasures, designed to deflect navigation hazards, became jamming systems that scrambled pirate communications, and sensor readings. The first assault craft that approached the station lost its engine control systems to a precisely targeted electromagnetic pulse and drifted helplessly into the debris field that surrounded the station. I spent 15 years as a cargo pilot in contested space, Ji-hoon said calmly into the communications channel. I have learned things about improvised defense that your combat manuals never imagined. 2 more assault craft fell to his converted defense systems before the pirates adapted their approach. But by then, Ji-hoon had anticipated their adaptation and prepared his next layer of defense. When boarding parties finally reached the station's airlocks, they found corridors filled with caustic vapor that their breathing equipment was not designed to filter. When they bypassed the chemical hazards, they encountered doors rigged to seal behind them and trapped them in sections with no exit. When their commanders tried to coordinate responses, they discovered that their communications were being jammed by equipment that should not have been capable of such interference. And through it all, Ji-hoon moved through the station like a ghost, appearing where he was needed most and disappearing before the pirates could pin down his location. His hands bled from the rough work of manual system overrides, and Suho could see from a distance that his earlier injuries were worsening with each physical exertion. But the human refused to stop. Nurse Kwon My-rae found Suho in the medical bay where he had been treating the few casualties their improvised defense had sustained. "Doctor," she said, her voice breaking, "I cannot stop crying. Are you injured?" "No," she replied. "I am reading his emotions from 3 corridors away. And what I feel from him is the most beautiful and terrible thing I have ever experienced." She looked at Suho with eyes that held wonder and horror in equal measure. "He is willing to die for people he has never met," she said, "not because he has to, not because someone ordered him to, but because he decided that their lives matter more than his own." She took a shaking breath. "Is that what humans are, Doctor? Is that why the Concordat fears them so much?" Suho did not have an answer, but as he watched the tactical display and saw the pirate fleet beginning to withdraw in the face of losses they had never anticipated, he began to understand why the question mattered and why the answer might change everything. The secure archives of Station Vera 7 occupied a small chamber deep in the administrative section, accessible only to senior staff with appropriate clearance and a demonstrated need to know Administrator Baek Gina had reluctantly granted Dr. Yeon Suho access after he explained, in terms that left no room for bureaucratic evasion, exactly what they were dealing with. Now Suho sat before the archive terminal while Dr. Sha Dong-yoon guided him through restricted historical files that painted a picture far more disturbing than anything Suho's 4 decades of medical experience had prepared him to comprehend. The initial contact occurred in year 847 of the expansion era, Dong-yoon narrated. A survey vessel discovered a system with a single inhabited world, a planet that the natives called Earth. The terminal displayed images captured 12,000 years ago, showing a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star, beautiful in the way that all life-bearing worlds possessed a certain inherent beauty. The survey team reported a species of remarkable adaptability, Dong-yoon continued. They had colonized every biome on their planet, from frozen poles to burning deserts, from mountain peaks to ocean depths, and they had done so without any of the biological specializations that such diverse environments normally require. How is that possible? Suho asked. That was precisely the question the Concordat leadership asked, Dong-yoon replied. The answer disturbed them greatly. He manipulated the terminal controls to display a series of biological studies Humans are generalists in the most extreme sense, capable of functioning across a wider range of environmental conditions than any other documented species. And this generalist nature extends beyond mere physical adaptation into the realm of psychology and behavior. Explain. They can be predators or prey, social or solitary, builders or destroyers, nurturers or warriors. And they can switch between these modes with a flexibility that the Concordat found deeply unsettling. Dongyun's 8 eyes all focused on Suho with an intensity that demanded attention. Most species are predictable, Doctor, because most species have evolved along specific paths that determine their responses to stimuli. But humans evolved as prey animals who refused to accept that role and instead became the apex predators of their entire world through sheer stubborn refusal to die. That seems like it would make them valuable allies, rather than threats to be quarantined. One would think so. Dongyun agreed. But there was another factor that complicated integration efforts. The terminal displayed new files. These ones marked with restriction warnings that made clear their contents were not meant for casual review. Humans have an unusual relationship with fear, Dongyun said. Most species experience fear as a survival mechanism that drives them toward caution and self-preservation. But humans experience fear as a challenge to be overcome. All sapient species can overcome fear when necessary. True. But humans do not merely overcome fear, they transform it. They use it as fuel for action, rather than as a signal for retreat. And more importantly, the thing they fear most is not their own death. What do they fear most? Dongyun paused as if weighing whether to continue, then spoke in a tone that carried the weight of historical revelation. They fear failing to protect those they care about. And when that fear is triggered, they become capable of actions that defy rational analysis. Before Suho could process this information, the archive chamber's door slid open to reveal Administrator Big Gina, accompanied by a figure that made both physicians straighten with surprise. Counselor Park Seiyujun wore the formal robes of the Galactic Concordat's governing body, his Valorian features arranged in an expression of cold authority that suggested this was not a social visit. Behind him stood 4 armed security officers in Concordat uniforms, their weapons not drawn, but clearly ready for immediate deployment. Gentlemen, the counselor said, I require you to surrender custody of the patient known as Kang Ji-hoon to Concordat. Authority effective immediately. On what grounds? Suho demanded, his mandibles clicking with indignation. Grounds of galactic security, Park replied. The patient represents a threat classification that exceeds the authority of this station to address, and continued custody by medical personnel risks escalation of that threat beyond containable parameters. The patient is injured and under my care, Suho said. Medical ethics require that I ensure his treatment is completed before any transfer can be authorized. Your medical ethics are noted and overruled, Park said. The Concordat has jurisdiction over all matters relating to this species, including medical treatment protocols, and I am exercising that jurisdiction now. What species? Gina asked, her bureaucratic instincts sensing an opportunity for clarification. The patient's file lists species as unclassified. Park's cold expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance. The classification is a formality that will be resolved once the patient is in proper custody. With respect, Counselor, Dongyun interjected. Proper custody would seem to require proper understanding of what we are dealing with. And the restricted archives suggest that understanding may have been deliberately suppressed. What you have accessed in those archives is classified information, Park said, his tone hardening. Your clearance has been temporarily elevated due to the emergency circumstances. But that clearance does not grant you authority to question Concordat policy regarding species management. I question nothing, Dongyun replied calmly. I merely seek clarification so that I may better serve the Concordat's interests. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the voice that came from the doorway behind the Concordat delegation. I think I can clarify things for everyone. Kang Ji-hoon stood in the corridor, dressed in the medical gown that Suho's staff had provided. His bare feet silent on the station's floor, and his brown eyes taking in the entire scene with an awareness that suggested he had been listening for quite some time. The security officers immediately raised their weapons, but Park gestured for them to hold position. "You should not be ambulatory," Suho said, his medical instincts overriding his concern about the political situation. "I heal fast," Ji-hoon replied with a slight smile. "It is a human thing." He stepped into the archive chamber, moving with careful deliberation that suggested he was fully aware of how threatening his presence might appear to the armed officers. "Counselor Park, I assume you are here because your government is afraid of what I represent. You represent a quarantined species that has violated the terms of isolation established 3,000 years ago," Park said. "That violation carries consequences. Consequences that include erasing my existence from medical records and taking me to some facility where I can be studied and contained and eventually forgotten." Ji-hoon asked. Park did not answer, which was answer enough. "I am not here to violate anything," Ji-hoon continued. "My ship was a cargo vessel on a legitimate trade route, and I have documentation to prove it. And the only reason I am here, instead of completing my delivery, is because pirates attacked my vessel and killed my crew. Your documentation is irrelevant," Park said. "Your species is not recognized by the Concordat, and therefore cannot engage in legitimate trade. Then perhaps it is time for that to change." Ji-hoon met the counselor's gaze with steady calm that seemed to unsettle Park more than any display of aggression might have. "I understand why your ancestors feared mine," Ji-hoon said. "Humans are frightening when you do not understand us. But fear is a poor foundation for policy, and 3,000 years of quarantine has not made either of our people safer. You are not in a position to negotiate policy," Park replied. "No," Ji-hoon agreed. "But I am in a position to demonstrate why negotiation might be preferable to the alternative." Alarms began blaring throughout the station before anyone could respond. An Administrator Gina's communicator chirped with an urgent message. Her face paled as she received the report. "Counselor," she said, "long-range sensors have detected a fleet of vessels approaching on an intercept course with this station. Configuration consistent with the pirate coalition operating in the Darkfall Nebula." Ji-hoon's expression changed. The careful diplomacy replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "They tracked the beacon," he said quietly. "They are coming to finish what they started, for the first time since entering the archive chamber." Counselor Park looked genuinely uncertain. "Your Concordat ships," Ji-hoon said. "How long until they can intercept the incoming fleet?" Park hesitated before answering. "Our escort vessels are configured for transport protection, not fleet engagement, and reinforcements are at least 6 hours away. And the pirates will be here in how long?" 45 minutes, Gina answered. "Perhaps less." Ji-hoon nodded slowly, and something in his eyes made Suho think of what Dong-yoon had said about fear transformation. "Counselor," Ji-hoon said, "you wanted to know why the Concordat fears humans so much." He turned toward the door with purpose in every line of his body. "You are about to find out." The patient remained unconscious for 6 more hours while Dr. Yeon Suho ran every diagnostic test available in the station's extensive medical database. Each test produced results that contradicted the one before it, building a biological profile that seemed designed to mock the very foundations of xenomedical science. Suho had called in Dr. Sha Dong-hyun, the station's chief xenobiologist, a Morthani scholar whose species was renowned throughout the galaxy for their obsessive dedication to classification and categorization. If anyone could make sense of this impossible patient, It would be Dong-Hyun and his encyclopedic knowledge of galactic biology. But first, there was the matter of Nurse Kwan Mai-Ray. The young Lithani had been assigned to monitor the patient's condition during the night cycle. Her species' natural empathic abilities, making them ideal for detecting changes in patient distress that mechanical monitors might miss when Suho arrived at the isolation ward for his morning rounds. He found Mai-Ray sitting outside the patient's room with her hands pressed against her temples and her usually luminescent skin flickering with distressed patterns. "Nurse Kwan," Suho said, his mandibles clicking with concern. "Report your condition." "I apologize, doctor," Mai-Ray replied. Her voice strained in ways Suho had never heard from the typically composed young nurse. "I am having difficulty maintaining professional boundaries with this patient. Explain. His emotional state during unconsciousness is overwhelming," Mai-Ray said. "Most patients in deep sleep produce minimal empathic signatures, perhaps fragments of emotion connected to whatever dreams their minds generate. But this one dreams with intensity that I have never encountered." She looked up at Suho with eyes that carried genuine fear. "He dreams of fire and loss and desperate hope. And his emotions burn so strongly that I can feel them through the isolation barriers. And I do not understand how any mind can sustain such intensity without destroying itself." Suho processed this information, while his clinical mind added it to the growing list of anomalies surrounding this unclassified patient. He dismissed Mai-Ray to the recovery ward with orders to take the rest of the shift off, then entered the isolation room alone to continue his examination. The patient lay motionless on the medical bed, connected to monitoring equipment that continued to produce contradictory readings with mechanical indifference to the confusion they caused. In the harsh light of the examination room, Suho took the opportunity to study the patient's physical form more carefully than the emergency situation had previously allowed. The body was a study in contradictions made flesh. The skin appeared fragile, easily damaged by environmental hazards that most spacefaring species would shrug off without notice. Yet beneath that vulnerable exterior lay muscle tissue of remarkable density and a cardiovascular system capable of sustained exertion that would exhaust creatures twice this patient's size. The hands particularly fascinated Suho, with their 5 flexible digits and opposable thumbs that suggested tool-using evolution. But the fingertips showed calluses and minor scars that spoke of direct physical labor rather than the refined manipulation typical of technological species. This creature worked with its hands in ways that left marks, and those marks told stories of a life lived in direct contact with the physical world. Remarkable, is it not? Suho turned to find Dr. Cha Dong-Yoon entering the isolation room. The Morthanese 8 eyes all focused on the unconscious patient with an intensity that Suho found somewhat unsettling. "You have reviewed my diagnostic reports?" Suho asked. 3 times, Dong-Yoon replied, "and I have cross-referenced them against every biological database available through my research credentials." "Your conclusions?" Dong-Yoon did not answer immediately, instead moving closer to the patient and extending one of his sensory tendrils to hover just above the unconscious form. "The biological markers are consistent with only one species in the historical archives," he finally said. "A species that was supposedly rendered extinct approximately 3,000 standard years ago. Extinct species do not appear in escape pods in the Darkfall Nebula." Suho observed. "No," Dong-Yoon agreed. "They do not, which means either the extinction records are false or we are dealing with something unprecedented in galactic biological history." He turned to face Suho directly, all 8 eyes conveying a gravity that the xenobiologist rarely displayed. "I must ask you a question, Doctor, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer disturbs you. Proceed. Have you ever heard the word Terran?" Suho searched his memory and found nothing. which was itself unusual given his extensive medical education and 4 decades of interspecies practice. "I have not." "That is because the word has been deliberately removed from general circulation," Dong Yun said. "It exists only in restricted historical archives that require special clearance to access. Archives that I've spent my entire career trying to understand." He gestured toward the unconscious patient. Terrans were encountered during the early expansion period, approximately 12,000 years ago, when the Galactic Concordat was still young and aggressive in its integration of new species. But unlike every other species encountered during that era, the Terrans were not integrated. "Why?" Suho asked, his clinical curiosity fully engaged despite the growing unease in his thorax. "Because they were deemed too dangerous," Dong Hyun replied. "Not because of their technology, which was primitive by Concordat standards at the time, and not because of their military capabilities, which were negligible against the fleet resources available to the expansion forces, but because of their fundamental nature, their biology, their psychology," Dong Yun corrected. "Their biology is merely a reflection of something far more concerning. Something that the Concordat leadership of that era found so threatening that they chose to quarantine the entire species rather than risk integration." "And what is that something?" Suho demanded, his patience for academic circumlocution wearing thin before Dong Yun could answer. The patient stirred on the medical bed, drawing both physicians' attention. Immediately, brown eyes opened again, clearer this time than during the previous brief awakening, and they swept the room with an awareness that made Suho's instincts scream warnings he could not name. The patient spoke, the same unknown language as before, but this time, the universal translator managed to parse approximately 60% of the syllables. "Where am I, and who are you, and what happened to my ship, and where is my crew?" The questions came rapid fire, each one delivered with an urgency that suggested the answers might determine whether this patient cooperated with his medical care or did something far less predictable. "You are safe," Suho said, choosing his words with care. "You were in a medical facility and you were recovered from a damaged escape pod. And as for your ship and crew, we have no information at this time." The patient absorbed this information, and Suho watched those brown eyes process data with a speed and efficiency that the diagnostic scans had not prepared him to expect. The escape pod's distress beacon. The patient said, "If it was still transmitting when you found me, then whoever attacked my ship might be tracking that signal." Suho felt his thorax constrict with sudden concern as he realized the implications of what the patient was saying. "Dr. Cha," he said, "contact Administrator Beak and have her verify the status of the beacon on that escape pod." Dong Hyun departed immediately, leaving Suho alone with the patient and the weight of questions that demanded answers. "What are you?" Suho asked, abandoning professional protocol in favor of direct inquiry. The patient looked at him with those brown eyes, and something that might have been sadness crossed his alien features. "My name is Kang Ji-hoon," he said, "and I am human, though I suspect that word means something very different to you than it does to me." Suho's compound eyes widened as he finally understood the magnitude of what he was facing. The extinct species was not extinct at all. And if the patient's warning about tracking signals proved accurate, then Station Vera 7 might soon discover exactly why the Galactic Concordat had chosen to erase humanity from its records 3,000 years ago. Dr. Yeon Suho clicked his mandibles together as he reviewed the morning schedule on his data tablet, his compound eyes scanning the list of patients with practice deficiency that came from 40 years of medical service on Galactic Medical Station, Vera 7. The day promised nothing unusual, and that suited him perfectly well. Velfrani merchant needed treatment for mild radiation exposure after passing too close to an unstable star. A Corthan engineer required his quarterly exoskeleton maintenance, and 3 Lathani pilgrims sought vaccinations before continuing their spiritual journey to the sacred moons of Vela Prime routine cases for a routine day on the most prestigious medical station in the neutral territories. Suho appreciated routine because routine meant predictability, and predictability meant fewer deaths on his watch. He had earned his reputation as one of the finest xenomedical practitioners in this sector through careful methodology and strict adherence to established protocols, not through reckless improvisation or dramatic interventions like the doctors in those ridiculous entertainment broadcasts. His junior staff enjoyed the station hummed with the quiet efficiency he demanded from his medical teams as he made his way through the pristine corridors toward his primary treatment. Wing nurses of 6 different species moved between patient rooms with practiced coordination, their movements choreographed by decades of refined procedures that left no room for error. This was medicine as it should be practiced, and Suho felt a familiar sense of pride as he observed his domain. That pride lasted exactly 17 more minutes. The emergency alert pierced through the station's calm atmosphere like a blade through silk, its shrill tone indicating an incoming vessel in distress. Suho's antennae twitched with irritation as he changed direction toward the emergency receiving bay, his 4 legs carrying him with surprising speed for someone of his age and distinguished position. Emergency cases, disrupted schedules led to cascading delays that affected every patient under his care. Administrator Big Gina met him at the receiving bay doors, her pale Valorian features arranged in an expression of bureaucratic concern that Suho had learned to read over their 15 years of professional collaboration. Single-occupant escape pod, she reported, her voice carrying the precise diction of her species. Recovered by patrol vessel Kindness of Strangers approximately 4 hours ago from the shipping lanes near the Darkfall Nebula. Species identification? Suho asked as they entered the bay together. That is the complication, Gina replied. And something in her tone made Suho's compound eyes focus more intently on her face. The escape pod sat in the center of the receiving bay, its hull scorched and pitted from what appeared to be weapons fire rather than simple debris impact. Medical technicians had already extracted the occupant and transferred the unconscious figure to a hover gurney, where monitoring equipment beeped and hummed with readings that made no sense to Suho's experienced eyes. He approached the gurney and examined the patient for the first time. The creature appeared vaguely similar to Valorians in basic structure, bipedal with bilateral symmetry and a single head mounted atop a flexible neck. But the proportions were wrong in ways that triggered an instinctive unease in Suho's clinical mind. The skin tone suggested warm-blooded metabolism, but the muscle density readings indicated physical capabilities that should have required a much more robust skeletal structure. The file, Gina said. Handing him a data tablet, Suho accepted it and opened the patient documentation, his eyes immediately drawn to the field that should have contained the most basic piece of information required for any medical treatment species: unclassified. He read the words 3 times before their meaning fully registered in his mind. In 40 years of practice across 7 different medical facilities, treating patients from over 200 documented species, Suho had never once encountered an unclassified patient. The Galactic Concordat maintained comprehensive records of every sapient species in known space, a database built over 12,000 years of expansion and exploration that formed the foundation of all interspecies medical practice. This must be an error, he said, though even as the words left his mandibles, he knew they were hollow. I have already verified with Central Registry. Gina replied. The biological markers match no known species in the database, and the genetic analysis has produced results that the computer describes as internally contradictory. Suho turned back to the unconscious patient and began his own examination with instruments he trusted far more than any computer analysis. What he found over the next hour disturbed him in ways he struggled to articulate even to himself. The patient's immune system operated with aggressive efficiency that bordered on the pathological, attacking foreign biological material with a ferocity that should have resulted in constant autoimmune disorders. Yet somehow the same body hosted trillions of symbiotic bacteria in a gut microbiome of staggering complexity. The skeletal structure showed evidence of multiple healed fractures, each one having mended stronger than the original bone in a regenerative process that defied standard medical understanding. The neurochemistry fluctuated between patterns associated with pack bonding, social species, and those found in solitary apex predators, as if the patient's brain could not decide what kind of creature it wanted to be. Doctor, one of the monitoring technicians called out. The patient's cardiac rhythm is destabilizing. Suho moved to the bedside as the heart monitor's steady pulse began to fragment into chaotic irregularity. He reached for the emergency resuscitation equipment, his training taking over as he prepared to intervene in whatever way this unclassified biology would permit. Then the patient's eyes opened. They were brown, a common enough color across many species. But something in their depth made Suho freeze with his manipulator appendages hovering over the resuscitation controls. The patient looked directly at him, and those brown eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakable and somehow terrifying in its intensity. Sounds emerged from the patient's mouth, syllables in a language that the universal translator could not parse, words that carried emotional weight even without comprehensible meaning. The patient seemed to be asking a question, seeking information, trying to understand where he was and what had happened to him. Then the cardiac monitor screamed its alarm as the patient's heart stopped. Entirely, Suho's training reasserted itself, and he reached for the resuscitation paddles, charging them to deliver the electromagnetic pulse that might restart the failed organ before he could apply them. The monitor's scream changed pitch. The heart had restarted on its own. Suho stood motionless as the patient's eyes closed again and the vital signs stabilized into something approaching normal parameters, his medical instruments hanging forgotten in his grip as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. Administrator, he said quietly, I need you to lock down this patient's location and restrict all information about this case to essential personnel only. On what grounds? Gina asked, though her tone suggested she had already reached similar conclusions. Because in 40 years of medicine, I have never seen a species capable of spontaneous cardiac restart, Suho replied, his compound eyes still fixed on the unconscious patient's face. And I suspect there is a reason this creature does not exist in our databases. The patient breathed steadily on the gurney, apparently unaware of the impossible thing his body had just accomplished, while Dr. Yeon Suho began to wonder what other secrets this unclassified species might be hiding. Somewhere in the back of his clinical mind, a voice whispered that perhaps some species remained unclassified for very good reasons, reasons that the Galactic Concordat preferred to keep buried in the darkness between stars.